Hello everyone. This section, part 2 of our emotion and motivation section, we are going to talk about theories of emotions. With that being said, our textbook doesn't really cover how emotions are formulated, so I've added some information from our OpenStax text. If you would like to read that for yourself, it's in chapter 10, section 4 of the OpenStax resource. I'm also going to go over it on this slide. I'm going to try to keep this one shorter for you, just because we have 3 parts in total for this unit, and I don't want to give you a bunch of really long videos. So let's address OpenStax 10.4 first, because what I really want us to get out of this is explaining the major theories of emotion, and looking at different parts of the brain, and the different components of emotion that we're going to look at. Right? Because we have looked at thinking and processing and a little bit of perception, not too much because I had to skip that section, I apologize. But emotions are going to be states of feeling, and they are going to be as a result of something in the environment. There's kind of like a causal link. So we're going to use the definition given to us in OpenStax as a subjective state of being that we often describe as our feelings. So if we do a bunch of examples of emotions, we think sad, happy, anxious. These are all going to be in response to something. Maybe you're anxious before presenting for one of your classes, right? There are going to be factors that are going to play into that emotion. And of course, different experiences are going to bring about different emotions in each person. Now, emotions are much different than a mood, because a mood cannot be pinpointed to a specific circumstance. It's not a response to something that we've experienced. It's just a less intense, prolonged affective state. So, pardon the expression, but sometimes people say they're feeling in a pissy mood. You may have heard that saying. It means kind of irritated, right? We don't really know what happened. We just woke up feeling really grumpy. And it may affect how we have subsequent interactions throughout the day, but we can't pinpoint what made us grumpy. That's the idea of a mood. Or sometimes you wake up in a really good mood and you think, why am I so happy? Why am I questioning my happiness? Why can't I just be happy? Right? That's a mood. So emotion is state specific. We can pinpoint it. And a mood is prolonged affective state that we can't find a causal link to. Now, with components of emotion, we're going to look at physiological arousal. So that's how our body reacts. So not how we looked at arousal in the last section. We're looking at arousal as just stimulation. We're going to also look at psychological appraisal and subjective experiences. So, psychological appraisal is how you value something. How we are going to measure the event that's going to produce the emotion. And this will be influenced by our experiences. Maybe we've had this event happen before and it had a bad outcome or a good outcome. If we use our example of presenting in a class, right? Maybe you almost passed out. That is not a good feeling, right? So maybe that has caused us to be anxious about subsequent presentations. Our background and culture and different experiences in these emotions are going to affect subsequent emotions and production of emotions. Now, while I present these theories of emotion, we're going to refer to the same example to see how these different theories are going to differentiate themselves from one another. So this is a North Carolina venomous snake known as the cottonmouth. I'm just using the snake as illustrative of something and how we would form an emotional response should we encounter said snake in the wild. So let's pretend that we're going on a hike. As a city folk, I don't know where the nearest place to hike is, but we're going on a hike and we encounter a snake, right? We have a bunch of things happening to our body, right? We may shake, we may get nervous, we may sweat, we may feel our heart pounding, and maybe we have some emotions like, oh snap, right? Or maybe we're like, oh my god, entirely freaked out. Or maybe you're like the crocodile hunter and you're really excited, right? So these emotions that you have, these feelings, are going to arise from physiological arousal, according to the James Lange theory of emotion. So, if we relate it to that fight or flight response in the autonomic nervous system, specifically sympathetic nervous system, our body is gearing us up to face that situation. Well, in this theory, we only experience emotions after our physical body reacts to the situation. So what James Lange theory is saying is that once we experience a stimulus, we're going to have the body experience. With the passing of time, we are going to, what is the word I'm looking for? Translate. We're going to translate those physiological mechanisms into an emotion. So this may be unconscious. We don't actually think about this, but our body may assess certain responses, physiological responses, as a fear response. Sounds pretty good, right? Pretty straightforward. Stimulus, our body reacts, then our brain reacts. But couldn't the emotion make our bodies react a certain way? Couldn't we appraise a situation and then act a certain way and then have our body react? Right? So what order does emotion occur? And that's what we're going to look at with these different theories. Now with the Cannon-Bard theory, this was a response to James Lange, and it was saying, you know what? I get that you want to look at physiological arousal, but are those cues distinct enough? Can we really differentiate fear from nervousness, right? Maybe sometimes people have the same response to being nervous, like sweating, heart pounding, as sexual arousal, sweating, heart pounding. So what Cannon-Bard is saying is that James Lange, you're too general with your physiological responses and arousal. We as humans aren't good at translating those. So with the Cannon-Bard theory, physiological arousal and emotional experiences are going to occur at the same time, but they're different systems. So they're both going to be in a response to that initial stimulus or event, but they don't rely on one another. Now, of course, this could also make sense. But much like anything else in psychology, I'm going to have to tell you a couple more theories because there could be another time matter, right? Could these things be separate, or are they what's the word I'm looking for? Implicitly linked, right? So this is where we're going. I forgot this bit. Sorry, let me backtrack a little bit. Rewind. So evidence to support the James Lange and Cannon-Bard theory focus on the physiological responses. So Schwales et al. In 1998 conducted a study. Here's a link to the abstract. If you have a login, I think you can view the article if you wanted to. Basically, they wanted to look at emotions in participants who had spinal cord injuries. Now, I want you to think about the purpose of the spinal cord in terms of your nervous system. What does it do? If you said it's the highway to and from the brain, you get brownie points because that's exactly what it does. And so the thought here is that with a spinal cord injury, there's an interruption in the signal sent through to and from the body, specifically to and from the brain. So Schwales et al. Thought that this interruption would affect how people perceive emotions who had spinal cord injuries. What they actually found was that these people experienced the emotions and there wasn't much difference, except the perception of the autonomic arousal may have intensified the emotions, but it's not necessary, meaning that people who had spinal cord injuries may not have felt the emotions as strongly as people without spinal cord injuries because they may have not been able to assess the physiological response of their body readily. Now, we have two more theories of emotion to look at. The Schachter-Singer two-factor theory of emotion looks at our physiological responses and how we cognitively assess the situation. we apply a label. This is kind of the first time where we see a conscious cognitive component, because the other ones were very unconscious, automatic, implicit, right? Whereas the cognitive label implies that we are consciously thinking about the different physiological responses, which in turn, these two factors will lead to the development of the emotion. So the physiological response is going to be similar across situations. This is derivative of the James Lange theory. So it's saying that yes, we have physiological responses to certain stimuli. Yes, they will be similar, as is the case between nervousness and fear, or nervousness and sexual arousal. But there's also going to be a cognitive component. So this is the differentiating factor. This is where the person appraises that stimuli. There's a conscious cognitive component. Remember, cognitive is just a fancy word for thinking. So you have the arousal of the snake, and concurrently you have your physiological response and your brain assessing the situation. And these two factors together are going to lead to fear or emotion. So with this Schachter-Singer model, we're getting kind of the best of both worlds. And finally, Lazarus in 1991 coined the cognitive mediational theory of emotion. Just the idea that emotions are going to be determined by the appraisal of a stimulus. So that appraisal, how we assess something, right, how we value something, is going to be immediate and unconscious. And in this case, the arousal event of the snake is going to lead us to appraise a situation, to think it out. And only after we've thought out that situation and given it some type of value will we have a physiological response. So I know there's a lot of different responses here to keep track of, but make sure you understand the kind of timeline. These charts will really help you in differentiating these different theories of emotion, because it is important to know what comes first. Does our thought come first? Does our physiological response come first? Right? Which one's which? Make sure you're able to apply these effectively. With that being said, I've given you a quick crash course video in this slide. So please make sure you check that out when you have the time. I'm not going to watch the video inside of a video. So make sure you check out the supplementary PowerPoint. Alright. There we go. Now with the biology of emotion, I bet you thought you were done with the brain, but you're not. We're going to look at the limbic system. The limbic system is very important for the development of our emotions, or the production of the emotion. We talked previously of the amygdala kind of creates emotional information, specifically like links in classical conditioning, right? We apply the value to learning processes. Well, specifically, that's going to be the basolateral complex located within the amygdala. And the central nucleus, again, a subsection of the amygdala, is going to deal with the autonomic nervous system and attention. So all of these factors are going into the amygdala and how we process emotional information. The hypothalamus, on the other hand, is going to be responsible for the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So that's that fight or flight response, right? And then finally we have the thalamus, which is going to be our sensory relay center. So that's going to be responsible for taking in the sights, the sounds, and different sensory information that may cause us to have some emotions. Like if someone snuck up on, or if someone was walking really closely behind you at night, right? You may have different physiological responses, and you may have, you're using those senses to kind of hear the noises, maybe look around to differentiate what's around you. Well, this is all the limbic system at work, trying to help you process that information. Maybe draw emotional value from what you've learned, as is the case with the basolateral complex, and also activate that sympathetic nervous system when needed and draw your attention to that stimuli. And the hippocampus, remember, it has to do a lot with memory, but specifically with emotion. It's going to bring that emotional experience with cognition together. So that's how you learn from that subjective experience and learn how to apply that emotion later. Now, with the NOVA text with culture and emotion, we're going to look at different cross-sectional studies, specifically looking at how emotions can vary across different cultures. And so we're going to look at individualistic and collectivistic cultures and what implications those have on the people within them in terms of their ideal affect or the affect they strive to achieve and the actual affect, the actual emotions that they exhibit. This is going to be different. And we have to know why it's important to look at these cultural differences. Now, I want you to think about this. I know you all are online, and so you can't really answer it. But do people at opposite ends of the world feel the same emotions? This is going to be a big question we're going to look at today. Maybe do they feel the same emotions but label them differently? Right? Cultural differences are going to impact how we perceive different situations. And those perceptions are going to change our emotions. One thing that may make one person very happy may make another person quite depressed. And our culture can influence this. So first let's look at why is it important to understand culture and emotion. Culture shapes people's emotional lives, and not just culture shapes multiple facets of people's lives and how they interact with the world, how the world interacts with them, and how it's kind of that reciprocated relationship, that cycle. Emotions are going to have an impact on the psychological health and well-being. We're going to see that different levels of expression of emotion may either have good or bad effects on the individual, depending on what type of culture they stem from. So we're going to look at depression, for example, because depression has some issues with expressing emotions for North Americans. So we're going to dive into that issue further. And also globalization. So globalization is this idea that we are becoming more interconnected with our world, thanks to accessibility of electronics and resources, right? And so we're learning to collaborate with people of different cultures. Well, these different emotional things or norms that we're going to encounter in other cultures, we need to identify those differences, be able to recognize them to work more efficiently with others. So if you are someone in, rural North Carolina working in something with IT from someone with Hong Kong, China, there's going to be cultural differences that may affect those emotional differences. And so they may also stem to, how someone expresses those emotions or how they take in the information you're giving them. And we're going to talk about this more, just giving you a little preview right here. But let's give a little bit of background on what we're going to talk about. In looking at how culture is a shaping factor for emotion, we find that universalist perspectives and the social constructivist perspective, it's kind of hard to get my tongue tied at night. These are going to be two dominant perspectives. In the universalist, think of universality or worldwide. So it's this idea that humans are going to feel similarly on the whole, regardless of culture. They're going to experience similar emotions. And this is the idea that this has been adapted from common ancestors. And those ancestors have learned to adapt according to the culture. But still maintain the same types of emotions, which just kind of makes sense if you look at a psychobiological perspective. Maybe there's some biological component to this, but strictly speaking, this is just theoretical. Just looking at think of it more as how humans affect their culture. I think that would be a better way to view it. Whereas social constructivists think of they're constructing their social responses and emotions. This is saying that, yes, humans have spawned from different groups and may have some fundamental emotions, but mostly these different groups have strayed from their common ancestors to adapt to their specific environments. And with that, people are unaware of how their emotions are shaped by their culture. Because the emotions are so quick to respond, they're unconscious and almost automatic. So people aren't really sure, they can't understand how much culture affects their emotions. Now, if you look at this slide, this was a study by Ekman in looking at how people discerned emotions in different faces. Now, if you looked at picture number 1 over here, what would you say about that woman? Maybe that she's happy. Number 2, I feel like this one's kind of hard, but maybe he looks a little scared or worried. And number 3, she looks kind of disgusted, right? And number 4 just looks angry. I don't know what's going on there. But this is a sample of pictures that Ekman used in this study to try to prove the point that try to argue for the universalist camp.